And so we close out another of the actors and characters from the MCU with Black Widow. What is, I have no reason to believe otherwise, the final appearance of Scarlett Johansson as Natasha Romanov. So, what did I think? Well, actually, let me back up. Why am I not getting this out any sooner? Well, because I had stuff I had to do. I had family-related stuff that I had to travel for. Like, everything's fine. Everybody's fine. It involved a lot of stuff that wasn't particularly fun. But I'm back. And now I've seen it. And now I can review the dang thing. So, this was an odd one to go into. I think especially because it's got an extra year plus worth of hype behind it. Or, time to speculate about it. Because this thing should have been out over a year ago. So I think the additional anticipation, if I were to gauge off what I'm seeing, probably didn't do it any favors. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I am going to touch a few specific aspects about how the thing appears to have been received overall that I'm like, because, like, to be clear, I don't look at other people's reviews until I have shot my own. So I can only go by impressions, but there are certainly elements of this thing that seem to have gone down very badly with some people. But we'll get there. So this is an espionage film as done by Marvel in the MCU. Cold War-esque, not literally Cold War because it's not set during it. She's not old enough to be involved in that. But Cold War adjacent, sort of still dealing with the pieces and the remnants and the programs put in place during that period of time. So all of that is in play. People from her past. We find out some of the very specific stuff that Natasha herself really feels the most aggrieved about in terms of the stuff that she has done. And I actually think there's some really interesting things about that I'm gonna wanna highlight in a little bit. Overall, thought it was pretty good. Probably about mid-tier Marvel for the most part. I will watch it again, I don't doubt, and we'll probably enjoy watching it again. But there isn't a ton that made me go like, oh yeah, like that's some of the best. But there's some good stuff, and there's some great moments. It opens fantastically. Like the open, actually up through the credits, because there's the cold open, which is set in 95 and deals with, well, the fake family that Natasha was in, a fake mother, a fake father, and a fake younger sister who is not old enough to understand that this isn't real, and they're embedded Russian agents in America. And that whole opening was really well done. It honestly kind of broke my heart. Now, this is not necessarily because it was the most amazing thing ever, but instead, probably because it tugged at my heartstrings as a parent. Seeing the younger sister, Yelena, 6 years old, doesn't understand what's going on. And she's also at an age where the other people involved can't really explain it to her. She won't understand. But knowing that everything is about to go to hell, and there's nothing that can really be done to stop it, and she doesn't know. And that, ow, in a good way. So, like, that hit me as a big part of the opening. And then the actual opening credits, despite sort of the cliche of, like, slow cover versions over... Well, I guess it's more of a trailer thing than a credits thing, but honestly, I kind of loved this slow cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit, and the contrasting of the images was actually really good and really evocative, showing the training of these young women of the Red Room and then contrasting it with images of, tinkering with DNA, or, you don't know what they're tinkering with, but science stuff, and then seeing pigs being herded and then cutting back to the girls and just giving you this impression that they are seen as assets and nothing else. So the overall tone and vibe of the thing, as I said, a bit in the espionage realm, but like still Marvel, Even before we get into characters with actual superpowers, you have characters like Natasha surviving blatantly unsurvivable falls because, bouncing off several metal objects before you hit the ground from 3 stories, that means you'll survive. Sure. that metal grate that you bounced off of totally broke your fall. So, if you like espionage, like the best espionage films tend to be fairly grounded. And this isn't, because it's Marvel. So know that going in. It is Marvel with an espionage flavor. And honestly, the standout for me here, like most of the performances are good. For me, the standout, though, is Florence Pugh as Yelena. I thought she stole the show for me. I suspect more people are going to lean towards David Harbour, everybody's favorite gruff dad figure, here playing a gruff dad figure. And, David Harbour's great. He's terrific at this. Alexei is very much the comedic relief. He didn't wear on me, thankfully. He could have. And I can even see a scenario where he might wear on some people. But, David Harbour just has this boisterousness and this enthusiasm that, it makes you like the characters that he plays. But for me, it was Yelena, because she just had so much wrapped up into this. Because, the rest of them, Natasha, her older sister, Melina, played by Rachel Weisz, and her father, Alexei, played by David Harbour, they knew what the score was. And while Natasha was young enough that, she didn't really like leaving any of this, and wasn't really okay with it, she did still understand. And Yelena didn't. Yelena looks back at those 3 years of her life as the best years ever. And that's messed up. And the film acknowledges that's messed up. And dealing with, the remaining remnants of what the Red Room was and what it did to girls like Yelena and like Natasha, I think that was a good thread to pull on for this movie. And I am going to start getting into some spoilers in a minute. Before I go there, action scenes are pretty good. I think probably the best one is also the most grounded one, and it's the initial confrontation between Yelena and Natasha. It feels very Atomic Blonde inspired. Unfortunately, a few too many fast cuts in the edit, more than were necessary, if I'm being honest. But for the most part, worked pretty well. It was a good, solid action scene. The rest of the action scenes are good. A few of them are a bit more CGI heavy than I would care for, but you know what? It's all effective. It's fun. It's thrilling. I care about most of the characters involved in them. So that stuff works for me. And I buy Natasha's motivation and her relationships with Yelena and with Melina, with Alexei. And these are not simple relationships these characters have. These are complicated, twisted, often unhealthy relationships these characters have. And I feel like for the most part, the film handled that well. Most of my critiques are going to come in the latter, kind of towards the very end. My big critique is probably going to be unique to me, but it's also kind of ending spoiler-y. So that's your spoiler-free section. I enjoyed it. About mid-tier for Marvel overall. I'll probably watch it again. If your only option is to get it through Premiere Access on Disney Plus, I'm not sure it's worth $30. I mean, unless you're going to watch it with several friends and collectively you all would have spent more than that to go to the movie theater. Yeah, sure. But otherwise, is it worth a $30 Premium Access? I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure any of the films that Disney has released that way have been, if I'm going to be honest. But it is something that I've seen and I've enjoyed. And I think whenever you feel like getting around to it, whether you want to do it now or wait, I think there's enjoyment to be had here. So let's get to the tail end. Let's start with the first thing that is kind of spoilery that I want to talk about. Because if there's one thing that a lot of people seem to have really not taken well to, it is the character of Taskmaster. Now, a couple of things about this. The first is, I think pretty much everybody paying attention cordoned onto the fact that whoever it was going to be under that mask, it was going to be a twist. Now, my assumption going in was that it was going to be Melina, the character played by Rachel Weisz. And then when it wasn't, I thought it was going to turn out to be Natasha's biological mother, And then ultimately it turns out to be the daughter of the guy who runs the Red Room thing. Now, here's the thing. There's a couple of things about this. So like I said, a lot of people seem to really hate this twist. So a couple of things. The first is, if your main objection to this is because you are a fan of the character of Taskmaster from the comics, I mean, he's made appearances elsewhere, but like, they've been fleeting in most things that aren't the comics. But if you are a legitimate fan of this character and you're disappointed because what they did with the character in the film is so different, it might as well have been someone else altogether, I get that. That's not where I'm coming from, because this is a character who I've always thought was a neat idea, but I have not really thought too much of when reading him. I think the only time I found him interesting was when Gail Simone was writing him, or honestly when things have been a bit more comedic. And given the tone of this film, I don't think the version of Taskmaster, at least that I've seen that I liked, would have particularly worked well in this setting. So, but if you want to make an argument they should have done a character other than Taskmaster if they were going to do what they were going to do, I don't have a counter to that. If that's your feeling, I'm not going to argue with you. That's a totally valid perspective. It's just not the one that I personally have. So when looking at this a bit more self-contained, I actually think within the scope of this film, I think the twist works. Not just in terms of I didn't guess it ahead of time. I got the impression that some people did, but I think even if you do guess it ahead of time, that doesn't stop it from working, because the reason it works is because it very literally confronts Natasha with possibly the thing she regrets most. And what I find particularly interesting about that is it's something she did not in service of the Red Room and all the people that she fled and has not spoken or interacted with, but something she did in the interest of defecting to the West and becoming an Avenger. It was that led her to do something that she deeply regrets, and to be literally face to face with her greatest regret. That, honestly, that works. I think, not only just on paper, I think as a moment it works. I think thematically it works. I think that's a solid approach. Now, that having been said, with what Taskmaster's skill set is, the fight scenes honestly should have been a lot more interesting with her than they are. And from a practical matter, if you want to, given that they didn't make the best use of the actual Taskmaster gimmick and the mirroring, I'm not saying they did nothing good with it. There's some cool bits in it, but it doesn't feel fully utilized, really. So given that, if you want to make the argument they could have picked literally any villain in a mask and it didn't have to be Taskmaster, I would say, yeah, you know what? Probably could have been. Because the actual, how she actually functions as a villain, as an antagonist, as an obstacle, as a threat, she works about as well as Winter Soldier did before the Bucky reveal. Once we found out that Winter Soldier was Bucky, he immediately became far more interesting in that Captain America and the Winter Soldier film. Before that, he was just a tough guy. And unfortunately, even after we get the reveal, Taskmaster doesn't really become more than just a tough fight. As a practical matter. Like I said, I think thematically and emotionally those elements are still solid, but ultimately the character also still has to function as an action antagonist, and the emotional and thematic links weren't as well integrated into the action the way that something like Captain America and the Winter Soldier was by the time that movie wrapped up. So I still do have some criticisms of the Taskmaster thing, but it's not because of the twist, and it's not because of the changes to the original character. Again, that's largely because I personally don't have a ton of attachment to this character. But if you're not prepared for this kind of thing yet, however many years after the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, or the depiction of Ghost in Ant-Man 2, or almost every character in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, both films, Like, there's a lot of liberties taken with these characters. Heck, the version of Wasp we have in the MCU at the time she was introduced wasn't even a character in the primary universe continuity of the Marvel Comics. So, I feel like sometimes this isn't the same character from the comics. I hear that and sometimes I tilt my head. I mean, again, if you are a fan of the original and you're disappointed at not seeing the character you like, that I get. But just saying, oh, you changed it too much. I'm like, they have changed so much. And like most of the time, it doesn't matter. In some cases, I genuinely think it's for the better. Not to say it's superior to the comics, but for the purposes of film, better choices. So like stating it in and of itself, like they changed the character so much, I'm like, and like I said again, there's criticisms to be made, especially if you're a fan of the character, and like the gimmick isn't fully utilized. But as far as the twist itself, I still will argue that works and was solid. Here's the thing that didn't work for me towards the very end, and again, this might be totally unique to me. I actually got really annoyed when the guy who was heading up the Red Room, my brain has lost his name now, but Stan Winston was playing him. Anyways, he basically turned out to be another Hydra. Like, he's got all these embedded agents, and he's like, I can turn the tide of a war, in a heartbeat, and like all this. I didn't like. I'm fine with the idea that he had all these embedded agents, but I didn't like the idea that the film plans that like he has all this actual power. What I wanted was not an actual person with the power to shift the world, but a petty tyrant. What I wanted, and what I think would have worked a lot better, especially for somebody who is carrying on a project established by a country that is gone and has been for decades, is somebody who doesn't actually have power over anything other than these girls. This is all the power he has in the world. And he's not going to stop because it's the only thing that he knows how to do. It's the only thing that he knows how to do that gives him any sense of feeling like he has a purpose, any sense of control. But to pull back the bigger picture of the world, I want him to mean nothing. I wanted what Natasha said to him about how, he's just this pathetic puppeteer. I wanted that to be true. So I didn't like him showing the full scale and scope of his operation and basically rebutting that. I liked the idea better. It felt more appropriate for this little man with this incredibly tiny sliver of still very dangerous and still very, can cause a lot of damage on an individual basis kind of power, but not a global threat. I disconnected the instant he was presented as being anything like that. And again, it just reminded me of the Hydra reveal. And like, it worked with Hydra. But like here, I'm like, dude, I find it more cathartic, the idea that we are beating you because you just won't stop doing what you're doing for no reason other than it's how you feel powerful. Rather than we have to stop because the world's in danger. Like, the world's in danger every other day. It's Tuesday. So, like, that annoyed me. We've got the post-credits scene with Yelena, which I like that it establishes that she is still around. I would like to see more of her. Like I said, she was actually my favorite character. It establishes a connection between her and the Contessa, who we have seen at this point previously in, it was supposed to be we saw her here first, but now we've seen her previously in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And it really does seem like she's kind of collecting like a mirror version of the Avengers. And there's some speculation that might lead to the Thunderbolts, because at this point she's got U.S. Agent, she's got Yelena. Yelena appears to have been working for her for a while now. She can theoretically break Zemo out of the raft and have it be a version of the Thunderbolts or the Dark Avengers or something. It really does feel like she's assembling that kind of team, which I'll be interested to see where they go with this and whether it ends up being more of a thing on the shows or in the movies. That's the one sort of big question mark for me on her right now and what she seems to be up to. as far as the rest of it goes, like I said, I think this was a solid piece of work. It wasn't great. I don't think the anticipation of a year's delay does it any favors, because it's not going to hold up to that kind of delayed gratification. But I still liked it. I still thought it was good. I thought it was a decent way to close out Natasha as a character, giving her, granted chronologically, before her actual death, but giving as a character in the franchise, giving her some closure around the stuff that we know was weighing her down, that we'd seen weighing her down up to this point. I think that was a nice thing to do as kind of a coda on the character. So my thoughts, while hardly phenomenal, hardly amazing, I'm not about to go to bat for this thing in the arena, but overall I'm positive. Not phenomenally positive, but I'm positive. I thought it was good. Black Widow. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. What was your favorite parts? What did you like the least? Be polite, and especially to other commenters, if they don't agree with you. Don't get into those kinds of fights here, but drop it down in the comments and let's see what you think. I have a Patreon. That is how I'm able to afford things like premiere access on Disney Plus, and also, pay my bills and eat. Even if you're not able to do that, like, share, subscribe, all helps me out. But no pressure on that either, because we take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break.